Before the story begins, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, so you don't miss more emotional and surprising stories ahead. And now let's dive into today's story. You should probably let Lily sit there, Evelyn. That seat's for immediate family, my daughter-in-law said with a smile so polished it almost looked kind. I stood there for a second holding my plate of mashed potatoes and roasted chicken while the rest of the table went quiet around me. My own grandson lowered his eyes. My son suddenly became very interested in refilling his iced tea. And just like that, at 72 years old, I realized I had become a guest in the family I spent my entire life building. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end, and tell me where you're watching from, because I never imagined my story would travel farther than the walls of that dining room. The dining room used to feel warm. Richard had built the long walnut table with his own hands almost 30 years ago. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday candle had once gathered around that table. Back then the room sounded different. Louder. Softer somehow too. Richard's laugh used to fill every corner of the house like music drifting through an open window. But after he passed away 3 years ago, silence settled into the walls like dust nobody wanted to clean. That Sunday evening, the chandelier cast a pale yellow glow across the table, while Vanessa adjusted the silverware for the third time. She always did that when guests were around. Tiny movements meant to show control. Lily likes sitting beside Michael, she explained lightly, motioning toward the chair near the center of the table. You understand. I nodded before anyone could see the embarrassment creeping across my face. Of course, I said quietly. I moved to the far end of the table beside the china cabinet where the light barely reached. No one objected. Not even Michael. My son had once cried when I left him at kindergarten for 2 hours. Now he barely looked at me during dinner. Vanessa carried the conversation effortlessly, talking about Lily's dance recital, their kitchen remodel, a couple's trip to Napa, planned for spring. Every few minutes she laughed and touched Michael's arm as though reminding everyone who mattered most in the room. I listened while cutting my chicken into smaller and smaller pieces I never actually ate. Halfway through dinner, Lily looked over at me. Grandma Evelyn, are you coming to my recital next Friday? Before I could answer, Vanessa smiled. It's probably going to be a little overwhelming for Grandma. Those auditoriums can get crowded. I'd still like to come, I said softly. Vanessa took a sip of wine without looking at me. We'll see how you're feeling. The conversation moved on as if I hadn't spoken at all. I stared at the family photographs lining the wall nearby. Birthdays, beach vacations, Christmas mornings. In every newer photo, I stood closer and closer to the edge. Sometimes partially cropped out altogether. I don't think it happened all at once. Families rarely break in dramatic ways. Sometimes they erase you slowly. One missed invitation at a time. One empty seat at a time. One careful little humiliation nobody else thinks is important enough to mention. After dinner, everyone drifted into the living room while I remained behind clearing plates nobody offered to help carry. I scraped untouched stuffing into the trash and wrapped leftovers into plastic containers while hearing Vanessa laugh from the next room. Michael laughed too. That hurt more than anything. When I finally carried the last dish to the sink, I caught my reflection in the dark kitchen window. My silver hair looked dull beneath the overhead light. My shoulders seemed smaller somehow. Tired. Invisible. Then I noticed something sitting near the coffee maker. A folded legal envelope with my late husband's handwriting across the front. My name. Evelyn Carter. My fingers froze before I even touched it, because suddenly, for the first time in years, I had the strange feeling Richard had seen all of this coming long before I did. I stood alone in the kitchen long after everyone had gone upstairs. The house sounded different at night now. Quieter than it used to be. The refrigerator hummed softly. A clock ticked somewhere down the hallway. And in my hands was the envelope Richard had left behind in his familiar uneven handwriting. For a moment, I simply stared at it without opening it. Richard had always written my name carefully, as though it deserved gentleness. Even after 46 years of marriage, he still wrote little notes before leaving for the hardware store or slipping out to meet old friends for coffee. Do not forget your scarf. Soup is in the oven. Back by 6. Tiny things. Ordinary things. But after he died, I realized ordinary love is what holds a family together. Not grand speeches. Not expensive vacations. Just small acts repeated over decades. I finally opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a folded document and a short handwritten note. Evelyn, if you are reading this, it means I was right to worry. That sentence alone made my chest tighten. I lowered myself carefully into one of the kitchen chairs while the overhead light buzzed faintly above me. Richard continued in that same calm handwriting I had known almost my entire adult life. There are things I could not say while I was alive because I hoped Michael would find his way back to himself. But I need you to know I saw what was happening. I saw the way they slowly pushed you aside. My eyes stopped there. For years I had convinced myself I was imagining it. Older people do that sometimes. We explain away disrespect because admitting the truth hurts too much. We tell ourselves everyone is busy. Young families have pressure. Life moves fast. We become experts at making excuses for people who stopped making room for us a long time ago. I folded the note slowly and looked toward the dark hallway leading upstairs. 3 years earlier, after Richard's funeral, Vanessa had stood in this exact kitchen with her arms crossed while movers carried boxes through the front door. "We thought it would be easier if we all lived together," she had said warmly. At the time I believed her. I thought grief had brought us closer. The first few months even felt comforting. Michael checked on me every morning before work. Lily curled beside me on the couch after school. Vanessa brought me tea at night and insisted I should not spend so much time alone. But little things started changing. One afternoon, I came home from grocery shopping and found my sewing room emptied. My fabrics and supplies had been stacked into plastic bins downstairs. Vanessa smiled apologetically. "Lily needs a study space now," she explained. "You understand." A few weeks later, the family started eating dinner earlier without telling me. Then came the vacations I somehow learned about from social media photos after they had already left town. Then holidays shifted too. Last Christmas, Vanessa redesigned the dining room seating chart because she wanted a more modern flow. My chair ended up beside the hallway near the coat rack while the rest of the family sat near the fireplace. I remember staring at the empty place setting beside me while laughter echoed from the other end of the table. Even then I told myself not to overreact. But Richard had noticed. Somehow he had noticed everything. Upstairs I heard footsteps crossing the bedroom floor above me. Vanessa's laugh floated faintly through the ceiling. Light, carefree, completely untouched by the ache she had planted inside this house. I looked back down at Richard's letter and noticed one final sentence written at the bottom in darker ink. "When the time comes, Harold Bennett will explain the rest. Trust him." A cold feeling settled into my stomach then. Not fear exactly. Something quieter. The strange realization that my husband had prepared for a storm I had not even admitted was coming. The next morning, I woke before sunrise the way I always had since Richard died. Grief changes sleep. It teaches your body to expect emptiness before dawn. I wrapped my cardigan tighter around my shoulders and walked quietly downstairs while the rest of the house remained asleep. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and cold coffee grounds. Outside the windows, the backyard sat still beneath a gray November sky. Richard used to stand on the deck every morning with his coffee mug warming both hands, watching birds gather near the fence line. He said mornings deserved silence before the world ruined them. I understood that better now than ever. I made myself oatmeal and sliced half a banana onto the top the way my doctor recommended, though I barely tasted any of it. Richard's letter sat folded beside my plate like something alive. I read it 3 more times while the house slowly woke around me. Upstairs a shower turned on. A door opened and closed. Footsteps crossed the hallway. Then came Vanessa's voice drifting down the stairs. "Michael, do not forget we have dinner with the realtor Thursday." Realtor. The word settled heavily in my chest. A few minutes later, Vanessa entered the kitchen dressed in cream-colored workout clothes that looked too expensive for someone simply driving Lily to school. She paused when she saw me sitting there. "You are up early," she said pleasantly while reaching for the coffee maker. I could say the same. She smiled without warmth. "Busy day." I watched her carefully measure coffee grounds into the machine. Vanessa liked control in small things. Perfect measurements. Folded towels stacked evenly. Decorative candles nobody was allowed to burn. At first I used to admire how organized she seemed. Now I realized control was the language she spoke best. I heard something about a realtor, I said softly. Her hand paused only for a second, barely noticeable. Oh, just exploring options, she replied. This house is a lot to maintain. This house. Not your house. Not Richard's house. Certainly not my house. Just a burden waiting to become profit. I nodded slowly and stirred my oatmeal, though it had already gone cold. I see. Vanessa turned toward me then, leaning lightly against the counter. You know, Evelyn, Michael and I have been talking about what makes the most sense long term. There it was. That careful tone again. The one she used whenever she wanted to move me somewhere emotionally before I realized I was being moved. You should not have to worry about stairs anymore, she continued gently. Maybe someplace smaller would feel easier for you. More manageable. I looked toward the staircase Richard built himself one summer after watching too many home improvement shows. He had fallen off the second step twice and laughed both times while I threatened to call a professional. Every inch of this house carried pieces of him. The thought of leaving felt like erasing him one room at a time. I managed just fine, I said quietly. Vanessa gave a sympathetic smile that somehow felt worse than cruelty. Of course you do. Michael entered the kitchen then, already wearing his office coat and scrolling through his phone. Morning, Mom. He kissed Vanessa on the cheek before opening the refrigerator. No eye contact. No noticing the tension sitting heavy between us. Your mother and I were just talking about the future, Vanessa said brightly. Michael nodded distractedly. Probably smart. Smart. That was all. I stared at my son while something inside me slowly hardened into clarity. He did not even ask what future they were planning for me. He already assumed the decisions belonged to them. Upstairs, Lily suddenly ran down the stairs carrying her backpack. Grandma Evelyn, she said breathlessly. I found Grandpa Richard's old camera in the attic yesterday. Vanessa's expression tightened instantly. Lily, we talked about staying out of the attic. But Lily ignored her and smiled at me instead. There were boxes up there with your name on them too. My heartbeat slowed strangely then. Not faster. Slower. Like some hidden part of my life had just quietly opened a door. That afternoon, after Michael left for work and Vanessa drove Lily to dance practice, I stood at the bottom of the attic stairs for nearly a full minute before climbing them. The wooden steps creaked softly beneath my weight. Richard always promised he would reinforce them someday. But somehow life kept moving faster than unfinished projects. Dust floated through narrow beams of sunlight slipping from the small attic window, turning the air gold and gray at the same time. The attic smelled exactly the way memory smells. Old cardboard. Cedar wood. Forgotten winters. I moved carefully past stacked holiday decorations and boxes filled with Lily's baby clothes until I spotted 3 storage bins pushed against the far wall. Each one had a white label written in Richard's handwriting. Evelyn. My throat tightened immediately. Nobody had mentioned these boxes to me before. Not Michael. Not Vanessa. I knelt slowly beside the first container and lifted the lid. Inside were photo albums wrapped neatly in folded blankets. Beneath them sat greeting cards Richard had saved over the years. Birthday cards from me. Anniversary notes. Even little drawings Michael made in elementary school with crooked stick figures labeled Mom and Dad in blue crayon. I ran my fingers lightly across the edges of the papers while memories rose around me so vividly it almost hurt to breathe. There had been a time when this family loved each other without calculation. A time before every conversation carried tension hidden beneath politeness. In the second box I found legal folders organized with colored tabs. House documents. Insurance papers. Bank records. Richard had always been meticulous about paperwork. Tucked inside the front folder was another envelope with my name, written across the front. Smaller this time. More urgent somehow. I opened it carefully. Evelyn, if you found these, then things have probably become worse than I hoped they would. I sat back against an old trunk while the attic settled quietly around me. Richard wrote that during the last year of his life, he began noticing changes in the house after I went to bed. Conversations stopping when I entered rooms. Financial discussions happening without including me. Vanessa pressuring Michael about selling property before Richard was even gone. One sentence made my stomach turn cold. She once asked how quickly your name could be removed from the deed after my death. I closed my eyes for a moment after reading that line. Not because I was shocked, because deep down I finally understood why Richard looked so tired during his final months. He had not only been fighting illness, he had been watching our family slowly unravel, while trying to protect me from seeing it happen. Beneath the letter sat a small digital recorder. I stared at it uncertainly before pressing play. Richard's voice crackled softly through the speaker, weaker than I remembered, but still unmistakably him. "If you are hearing this, Evie, then I was right to worry." Tears burned instantly behind my eyes. He had not called me Evie in public for years. Only when we were alone. "You spent your whole life putting this family first," he continued slowly. "I need you to stop apologizing for taking up space in your own home." I covered my mouth as emotion rose sharp and sudden inside my chest. Downstairs, the front door suddenly slammed shut. Vanessa's voice echoed faintly through the house. "Lily, put your shoes away." I quickly lowered the volume on the recorder. For the first time in years, I felt something shift quietly inside me. Not anger. Not revenge. Something steadier. Like waking up after a long illness and finally recognizing the room around you. I looked back at the boxes Richard left hidden in the attic and realized my husband had not spent his final months preparing to leave this world. He had spent them preparing me to survive after he was gone. For the next 2 days I said almost nothing. I moved through the house quietly, observing things I had spent years pretending not to notice. Once you finally see the truth inside your family, it becomes impossible to unsee it. Vanessa stopped lowering her voice when discussing money because she assumed I was no longer paying attention. Michael avoided eye contact more than ever. Even the house itself felt different to me now. Not warmer. Not safer. Just carefully managed. Like a hotel pretending to be a home. Thursday evening arrived colder than expected. Rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows while Vanessa prepared dinner with unusual energy. Candles flickered on the dining table. Cloth napkins replaced the paper ones they normally used during the week. Michael even brought home a bottle of wine expensive enough that he usually saved it for clients or holidays. The performance would have almost been touching if I had not finally learned how to recognize it. "You should sit closer to the fireplace tonight," Vanessa said brightly as we gathered around the table. "I know you get chilly." 3 days earlier, she had moved me away from that exact spot because Lily supposedly needed it more. I smiled politely and took the chair without comment. Throughout dinner, Vanessa kept asking if I needed anything. More potatoes. Another bread roll. Extra tea. Every gesture felt rehearsed. Michael joined in too, asking about my arthritis medication for the first time in months. "You should let us take care of more things around here, Mom," he said carefully. Around here. The phrase lingered strangely in the air. Not your house. Not your life. Just a temporary arrangement they believed they controlled. Lily glanced between all of us quietly while pushing green beans around her plate. Children always sense tension long before adults admit it exists. "Grandma Evelyn," she asked suddenly, "did Grandpa Richard really build this whole house himself?" Before I could answer, Vanessa interrupted with a soft laugh. "Not the whole thing, sweetheart." But I nodded slowly. "Most of it." My eyes drifted toward the living room doorway where Richard once spent 6 straight weekends sanding hardwood floors himself because he said shortcuts eventually reveal themselves. He used to whistle while he worked. Frank Sinatra songs mostly. The sound had become part of the walls. "Your grandfather believed a home should make people feel safe," I said quietly. Vanessa lowered her wineglass carefully onto the table. "Well, homes also have to evolve," she replied. "Families outgrow things." There it was again. The gentle language she used whenever she wanted to erase something permanent. Old furniture. Traditions. People. Michael cleared his throat awkwardly. "Vanessa and I actually met with a realtor today," he admitted. He finally looked at me then, though only briefly. "Just to explore options." I folded my napkin carefully onto my lap before speaking. "Options for whom?" Silence settled over the table instantly. Vanessa recovered first. "Evelyn, we are only trying to think ahead responsibly." Responsibly. Such a polished word for displacement. "The market is strong right now," Michael added quickly. "We could all end up somewhere better suited long term." Somewhere better suited. as though I were an aging piece of furniture requiring storage. I noticed Lily staring down at her plate again, uncomfortable now. I reached for my water glass slowly, giving myself time before answering. Your father left this house for a reason, I said softly. Vanessa's expression barely changed, but I saw it. Flicker. Small. Sharp. Actually, she replied carefully, I do not think Richard finalized everything the way you believe he did. The room became very still then. Rain continued tapping softly against the windows, while my heartbeat slowed into something almost calm. Because for the first time I realized Vanessa was not entirely confident anymore. Somewhere beneath her polished voice and perfect posture, fear had already started quietly growing. The morning after that dinner, the house felt strangely careful around me. Vanessa moved through the kitchen with exaggerated sweetness, humming softly while placing fresh flowers near the sink. Michael offered to carry my laundry upstairs before leaving for work, something he had not done since Richard was alive. Even the way they spoke to me had changed. Slower. Gentler. Like people trying not to disturb something fragile. But fragility was no longer what I felt. I watched them quietly now, the same way Richard must have during his final months. Patterns revealed themselves once you stopped begging to be included. Around noon my phone rang while I was folding towels in my room. The number looked familiar, though I could not immediately place it. Hello. Evelyn. The voice on the other end sounded older, measured, professional. This is Harold Bennett. I sat down slowly on the edge of my bed. Harold had been Richard's attorney for nearly 30 years. He attended our anniversary parties, sent Christmas cards every December. After Richard passed, Harold disappeared almost completely except for a brief appearance after the funeral. I was beginning to wonder when you might call, I said quietly before I could stop myself. A pause followed. Then you found the documents. Not a question. A statement. I glanced toward my closed bedroom door. Yes. Harold exhaled softly. Richard asked me not to contact you unless certain things became clear first. My fingers tightened around the phone. Clear. That your living situation had become unhealthy. I closed my eyes briefly. Hearing someone else say it aloud made the truth feel heavier somehow. More real. He saw more than I did, I admitted. Richard saw everything, Harold replied gently. Silence settled between us for a moment before he continued. There are additional matters regarding the estate that we need to discuss privately. Estate. The word instantly explained the sudden change in Vanessa's behavior. Does Michael know? I asked. No, Harold answered firmly. And Richard specifically requested that I speak with you alone before anyone else received details. My heartbeat remained calm surprisingly. Weeks earlier news like that would have terrified me. But now I only felt tired. Tired of being the last person informed about my own life. Harold asked if I could meet him Friday afternoon at his office downtown. I agreed before hanging up. Then I sat there quietly for a long time staring at the framed photograph beside my bed. Richard and I at Cape Cod 20 years ago. Wind blowing through my hair. His arm around my shoulders. We looked happy because we were. Real happiness always photographs differently than performance. Later that afternoon, Vanessa knocked lightly on my bedroom door carrying a tray with tea and sliced pound cake. I thought you might like a little snack, she said warmly. I almost smiled at how transparent it had all become. Vanessa never brought me tea unless guests were visiting. That is thoughtful, I replied. She stepped farther into the room, eyes casually drifting across my dresser, my closet, my nightstand. Searching. Calculating. You seemed distracted after dinner yesterday, she said carefully while setting the tray down. I just hope you know we only want what is best for everyone. Everyone. Such a useful word when people want access to something that belongs to someone else. Of course, I said softly. Vanessa hesitated before speaking again. Michael worries about you feeling overwhelmed with legal paperwork and property matters. There it was at last. Not grief. Not concern. Ownership. They thought I was confused. Manageable. Easy to guide toward whatever future suited them most. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. Richard trusted me more than people realized. Something unreadable flickered across Vanessa's face then. Not anger exactly. Unease. Before she could answer, Lily suddenly appeared in the hallway behind her. "Grandma Evelyn," she said breathlessly, "there is a man downstairs asking for you." Vanessa turned immediately. "Who?" Lily shrugged. "He said his name is Harold Bennett." The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly it almost frightened me. And for the very first time since Richard died, I realized I was no longer the only person in this house quietly afraid of what came next. Harold Bennett stood in the front hallway holding a black leather briefcase against his side, while rainwater darkened the shoulders of his charcoal coat. He looked older than I remembered, thinner too, but his eyes remained sharp and steady beneath silver eyebrows. The moment Vanessa saw him standing there, her entire posture changed. Her smile froze halfway into place like an actress forgetting her next line. "Harold," she said carefully. "What a surprise." Harold nodded politely but did not return her warmth. "Mrs. Carter," he replied in a professional tone that immediately established distance. Michael appeared from the kitchen moments later, confusion spreading across his face. "Harold? Is everything okay?" Harold glanced toward me before answering. "I came to speak with Evelyn privately regarding Richard's estate." The word privately landed heavily in the room. Vanessa folded her arms loosely across her chest, trying to appear relaxed. "Well, anything involving the family can be discussed together." "No," Harold answered calmly. "It cannot." Silence followed instantly. Even Lily stopped moving in the hallway beside the staircase. I watched Michael carefully then. Not angry. Not defensive. Nervous. Like someone realizing a conversation had started without him. Harold turned toward me gently. "Would you be comfortable speaking in Richard's study?" For a moment nobody moved. Richard's study had remained mostly untouched since his death. Vanessa rarely entered it because she said the room felt depressing. I think the real reason was simpler. Richard's presence still lived there too strongly. "Of course," I said softly. Harold followed me down the hallway while the rest of the house seemed to hold its breath behind us. The study smelled faintly of cedarwood and old paper. Richard's reading glasses still rested beside his favorite chair exactly where he left them 3 years earlier. Some mornings I still expected to hear newspapers rustling from inside that room. Harold closed the door quietly before placing his briefcase onto the desk. "Richard prepared extensively before he passed," he began carefully. "More extensively than anyone realized." I sat across from him while rain tapped softly against the windows. "He knew they planned to sell the house," I said quietly. Harold nodded once. "He suspected pressure would begin almost immediately after his death." He opened the briefcase and removed several folders organized with colored tabs. My name appeared on nearly every document. "Richard changed the structure of his estate 8 months before he passed away," Harold explained. "The house, savings accounts, investment properties, and life insurance policies were transferred into a protected trust under your control." I stared at him silently while the words settled slowly into place. "Under my control?" "Entirely." My hands remained folded calmly in my lap, though inside something deep and painful began shifting loose after years of feeling trapped. Harold continued carefully. "Michael receives a future inheritance only under certain conditions clearly outlined by Richard." "Conditions?" Harold removed a single typed page and slid it toward me across the desk. "The primary condition states that no family member may pressure, manipulate, or remove you from your residence or financial authority." I looked down at Richard's signature at the bottom of the page. Firm. Certain. As though he had known exactly what would happen after he was gone. "There is more," Harold said gently. He reached into the folder again and removed several printed photographs. Security camera stills. Timestamps. Images from inside the house during Richard's final months. Vanessa standing in this very study searching through desk drawers. Michael meeting privately with a realtor weeks before Richard died. My stomach tightened quietly. Richard had documented everything. Why would he do this? I whispered. Harold's expression softened then. "Because Richard loved you enough to prepare for the possibility that grief might reveal people's true priorities." Outside the study door, faint footsteps crossed the hallway, then stopped. Someone was listening. Harold lowered his voice slightly. "There is a formal family meeting scheduled for Sunday regarding the estate." My eyes lifted toward him immediately. Who scheduled it? Vanessa did, he answered calmly. Which tells me she still believes the will favors her position. For the first time in years I almost smiled. Sunday arrived colder than expected. The trees outside the front windows stood bare beneath a pale gray sky while the house filled with the uncomfortable quiet people carry into rooms where they expect money to change hands. Vanessa spent the entire morning arranging things. Fresh flowers on the dining table, candles lit in the living room, a tray of pastries from the expensive bakery downtown carefully displayed beside polished coffee cups. It reminded me of the way hotels prepare conference rooms before difficult business meetings. Everything designed to appear welcoming, while nobody actually relaxes. Michael wore a navy sweater Richard once gave him for Christmas. I noticed that immediately because Michael had not worn it in years. Vanessa dressed carefully too. Cream blouse, gold earrings, soft makeup, the uniform of a woman preparing to inherit something. By noon, Harold Bennett arrived carrying the same black briefcase from earlier that week. His calm expression did not change when Vanessa greeted him too enthusiastically at the door. "Thank you so much for coming," she said brightly. Harold nodded politely. "Of course." Lily sat quietly beside me on the couch while adults moved around the room pretending this gathering felt normal. She leaned closer and whispered softly, "Mom has been nervous all morning." I gently squeezed her hand once. Sometimes people become nervous when they expect life to change. At exactly 1 o'clock, Harold opened his briefcase and removed several folders. The room settled instantly into silence. Rain drifted softly against the windows while the grandfather clock near the staircase ticked louder than usual. "As requested by Richard Carter," Harold began calmly, "we are here today to formally review the final structure of his estate." Vanessa folded her hands together elegantly in her lap, though I noticed how tightly her fingers intertwined. Michael stared at the floor. Harold continued reading through financial details first. Savings accounts, insurance policies, investment properties. Vanessa listened with growing confidence each time another asset was mentioned. I could almost see her mentally arranging furniture inside a future she already believed belonged to her. Then Harold opened the final folder. The atmosphere in the room shifted immediately. Even he handled this document more carefully. There is an additional statement left by Richard Carter regarding the family residence and primary inheritance structure. Vanessa straightened slightly. Michael finally looked up. Harold adjusted his glasses before reading aloud. "To my wife, Evelyn Carter, who spent her life holding this family together long before anyone appreciated the cost of her sacrifice, I leave full ownership and control of all residential property, trust holdings, and estate authority effective immediately upon my death." Silence. Complete silence. Vanessa blinked once as though she had misheard him. Michael's face drained slowly of color. Harold continued calmly. "No sale, transfer, modification, or occupancy change regarding the family residence may occur without the direct written consent of Evelyn Carter." Vanessa spoke first. "That does not make sense." Her voice remained controlled but barely. "Michael is his son." Harold looked directly at her. Richard anticipated this reaction. He removed another document and placed it carefully onto the table. "There are also conditional clauses attached to future inheritance distributions." Michael stared at the papers now with visible confusion. "Conditional?" Harold nodded once. "Any attempt to pressure, isolate, manipulate, or remove Evelyn Carter from her residence or financial authority results in immediate forfeiture of secondary inheritance rights." The words settled over the room slowly like snowfall. I watched Vanessa's composure begin cracking in tiny, almost invisible ways. Her breathing changed first, then her posture, then finally her eyes. Fear always reveals itself there eventually. "This is absurd," she whispered. "Richard would never." "Richard documented everything," Harold interrupted quietly. He opened another folder containing photographs, notes, timestamps, and written observations gathered over nearly a year. Vanessa stopped speaking immediately. Michael stared at the evidence in disbelief. "Dad did this?" he asked weakly. Harold's expression softened slightly. "Your father loved your mother very much." Nobody spoke after that. The grandfather clock continued ticking in the corner while rain slid slowly down the windows behind us. And for the first time since Richard died, I no longer felt invisible inside my own home. The house became quieter after that Sunday. Not peaceful, just careful. Like everyone suddenly understood the walls were listening. Vanessa stopped rearranging furniture and speaking about realtors. Michael spent longer hours at work. Even their footsteps sounded different moving through the hallway now. Slower. Uncertain. Meanwhile, I found myself breathing easier for the first time in years. It surprised me how quickly dignity returns once people stop treating you like an inconvenience. 3 weeks later, I stood alone on the back deck wrapped in Richard's old wool coat while cold December wind carried the scent of pine through the yard. Snow threatened the edges of the sky but had not fallen yet. The bird feeder Richard built years ago still hung crooked near the fence. I smiled softly watching two cardinals land there together. Richard always said birds return to places where they feel safe. I understood that now too. Behind me, the sliding glass door opened quietly. Michael stepped outside holding 2 mugs of coffee. For a moment, he looked like the young man I used to know before life and weakness slowly shaped him into someone quieter and smaller than his father. He handed me one of the mugs carefully. "I added cinnamon," he said. "The way you like it." I accepted the cup gently. "Thank you." We stood in silence for a while watching bare tree branches sway against the gray afternoon sky. Finally, Michael spoke without looking at me. "Dad knew, did he?" The sadness in his voice felt genuine this time. Not performative. Not defensive. Just tired. "Yes," I answered softly. Michael nodded slowly as though confirming something painful he already suspected. I do not know when everything changed. I wrapped both hands around the warm coffee mug before answering. Small things change first. He swallowed hard and stared out across the yard. "Vanessa thought we were planning for the future." "No," I said quietly. "She was planning for ownership." The words hung between us cold and honest. Michael lowered his eyes after that. "I should have protected you better." I looked at my son carefully then. Older now. Grayer around the temples. Regret settling into his face the same way grief once settled into Richard's. "You should have seen me," I answered softly. That hurt him more because it was true. Inside the house, I could see Vanessa moving through the kitchen alone. She no longer carried herself with the same certainty. Some mornings I caught her staring at legal papers spread across the dining table with an expression that looked less like anger and more like confusion. People who build their lives around control rarely know what to do once it disappears. A month later, I made my final decision. Harold helped me purchase a small cottage nearly 200 miles away along the Maine coastline. White shutters. Blue front door. A wraparound porch overlooking the water. Quiet. Simple. Mine. Lily cried when I told her I was leaving, though I promised she could visit every summer. Michael offered to help me pack, and this time I let him. Vanessa remained polite through the entire process, but politeness without warmth feels hollow once you recognize the difference. On my final morning in the house, I walked slowly through every room alone. Richard's study. The kitchen. The staircase he built with his own hands. Sunlight poured softly across the hardwood floors while memories moved quietly through the silence beside me. I no longer felt erased there. I simply felt finished. Before leaving, I placed Richard's photograph carefully into the front seat beside me. Then I closed the front door gently behind me without anger, without revenge, without another argument. Just peace. As I drove away, snow finally began falling across the empty street in slow, soft pieces. And for the first time in many years, I realized something unexpected. Being left out of a family can break your heart. But sometimes it also saves the part of you they almost convinced you to forget. And that's the end of today's story. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more unforgettable stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.